Hey everyone, welcome to the show today. My guest today is Robin Oliver, a recognized authority on tax economics and policy, both in New Zealand and internationally. Robin served as the former Deputy Commissioner of Policy at Inland Revenue, and he's worked for the New Zealand Treasury as well. Robin was honored as a member of New Zealand of Order of Merit in 2009, and he holds an MA First Class honor in Political Studies with an LLB from the University of Auckland. Thank you, LinkedIn. Now, I invite you today to delve into this conversation, not necessarily to change your stance on wealth tax, but to expand your understanding of the counter argument, often not shared. Let's dive into this, question it, strive for understanding, do whatever it takes to keep an open mind. And welcome to the conversation. Let's get started.
Thanks for having me on.
I want to get started just by asking you hopefully a fairly simple but obvious question. Do you feel like New Zealand's tax system is in need of a major overhaul?
I think it's a very good question. The short answer, no. That I think we have a very sound, good tax system in terms of the policy settings and in terms of administration. I think we've got frankly, the best in the world. Why do I say that? Basically, an honest system. The tax law is more or less what you pay, and it's all transparent and clear. It fits together, has an objective. In many countries of the world, you have high tax rates, but lots of tax concessions. People can, in the fine print, can find ways, and it's deliberate, to pay no tax. And everybody talks about the high tax rates. And in fact, a lot don't pay tax. And the US is an obvious example of that. And with Donald Trump never paying tax, apparently. Our tax administration is competent, efficient, and honest. It's not corrupt. And so the combined, we do, in my view, have the best of the world. That's not saying you can improve things. You can improve stuff, but that's at the margin. The fundamentals of our tax system it's very solid, and that's the conclusion of the Cullen report, the McLeod report, going back many years. And I suppose my main concern is we keep that. We keep a good, solid system.
So then a lot of the stuff that I've been reading and hearing about in mainstream media seems to imply, though, that it's not fair. It's not working. So what would you say to and specifically, and we'll get into the specifics as we go, but especially around the fact that there's no capital gains tax, no ability to take from those who have wealth and redistribute it. A lot of people are starting to say that that's not fair. What would you say to that?
Well, fairness is a point of view, and people can have totally different views as to what's fair. But the underlying fairness aspect, I think, is the tax system should be based upon, to some extent, an ability to pay. So the more you earn, the more tax you should pay. And I think there's general consensus of that. And if you look at the reports that have come out, there are three reports: the Superior Report, which we commissioned, the Treasury reports, and then the IRD reports. And the Superior Report and the Treasury Report both looked at the entire population. Inland Revenue looked only at 311 people, the top wealthy. And you look at the Superior Report and the Treasury Report, they're basically agreed we tax on an ability to pay. The more a household earns, the more tax it pays. The more it earns, the higher the rate is. So it's a progressive tax system. Now, you can argue it should be more or less progressive, but it is based upon that, there is that basic fairness aspect is there. So I don't think, you can argue about capital gains tax. We've been arguing about capital gains tax for 50 years with various reports. Some say yes, some no. Governments always come out with a conclusion not to do it to date, but we still have a tax system which taxes on an ability to pay.
Let's drill down on that then, ability to pay, because my understanding of the tax system, which is probably pretty amateur, let's be honest, but I do kind of understand some of the general principles of this. And one of them is that in New Zealand, we tax the fruit, not the tree. And I understand that. So I understand that if I'm investing, if I own a home or I own another home, or if I'm investing in KiwiSaver or managed funds or shares, I will be taxed on the revenue, the income stream that comes to me from that, but I won't be paying an additional tax because those investments have increased in value. So when we're talking about the ability to pay, obviously if we need to pay tax, it needs to come from somewhere. And if it's locked into our wealth, like the tree, we can't really unlock it without killing the tree or without selling it. So do you think that this discussion around this economic income is an attempt to slide capital gains into the discussion around what real income is?
Well, if you take the Inland Revenue Report,
Mm-hmm.
which looked at the top 311 people, it came out with this headline tax rate of 8.9 or 9.1, depending on GST or not, but under 10%.
Mm-hmm.
And the Superior and Treasury reports all agree that middle income earners, 170,000, something like that. So at the top of that range, probably about mid-20s. And so basically your headline is, half. Why is that? The answer is capital gains, but not realized capital gains, unrealized capital gains. So all the difference between the half rate and half the tax rate, which IRD said less than 10%, and Superior, which says it's mid-20s, is all about unrealized capital gains. So that is your business that is still ongoing. You're paying tax on your profits, but you still have your business. Interest rates fall, the business is worth more because of how you calculate the present value of any business. The farm is worth more. That's because around the world, central banks have been loosening monetary supply, allowing interest rates to fall, and therefore asset values go up.
Mm.
You have to question why, because central banks loosening monetary policy, I should have to pay a whole lot of tax immediately to the government. And of course, and all of that in the Inland Revenue Report, half those unrealized capital gains were in the year 2021, which was an asset price bubble because of central banks loosening monetary policy in response to COVID. And a lot of that's now reversed. So under that thing, in the next year, the government will be refunding a lot of that money. So at the moment, Grant Robertson would have no tax revenue, whereas the year in 2021, under taxing on unrealized capital gains, he would have been flush with money. Next year, he'd have none. You can't operate a government on that basis. So really, it's not just the capital gain; it's whether the actual realised capital gains are relevant to the Inland Revenue Report. It wouldn't make much difference if you included them or not in terms of the tax rate. But the real issue between the reports is this unrealised capital gain. No country has a comprehensive tax on unrealised capital gain. So it's a theoretical tax, a theoretical definition of income, which no one applies in practice.
So this term economic income, which effectively is the income and the capital gains, is a little bit misleading though, isn't it? Because it kind of implies that some people aren't paying tax. And so that effectively explains the discrepancy between the IRD report and the Superior report. Is that true?
Yeah, well, economic income is a very wide term. For an economist, it means well-being, or for colloquially, happiness. If you're happier, you have more income in an economic sense, and that makes perfect sense in terms of welfare economics. But you can't tax on the basis of happiness. You have to have something workable, something that gives certainty, is not at the whim of officials in determining what it is. It is concrete, workable, certain, and you can't tax on economic income. But an economic income, it also includes things like the rental value of the home you live in. even if you don't pay, or you obviously don't pay rent on your own home, but economically, you would take into account what you could rent it out of.
Mm.
You also take into account household chores, such as child minding. What you would, part of your economic income, if you're one of the spouses looking after the children, that's economic income of the household, equivalent to what they'd have to pay for someone else to come in and do the child minding. And that makes perfect sense from economics point of view, because it recognises the importance of child minding in the economy. But you're not going to be taxing people on their a deemed income from looking after your own children. That would be silly. What we have as a concept designed for taxing people is a definition of income in the Income Tax Act.
Mm-hmm.
And that's based upon a lot of policy considerations, what's workable, and so forth and so on. And that certainly can include realised capital gains. But as I say, that's not central to why inland revenue came to a low tax number.
Okay. No, that's good. And so I want to go back to what we started with, where you genuinely feel like no overhaul of the tax system is really required, and it actually is functioning fine. It's working fine. Going back to 2021 or March 2020, when the central bank decided to reduce interest rates significantly, keep them low for, in my view, way too long. And that pumped up asset prices, of course. And then along comes an initiative to scrape away those gains through this push to almost usher in like a wealth tax or capital gains tax by stealth. But is it kind of almost like injecting a bunch of hormones and water into pork to make the pig look fatter for the slaughter? Like what the central banks create in us through wealth, well, virtual wealth creation when we own assets by keeping the cost of money artificially low, makes us appear to be wealthy, which then creates more social division and gives ammunition for the have-nots to then go after the haves. Is that kind of what's going on here? Or is there something else going on where this is by design to introduce a need for capital gains tax?
I mean, Minister Parker is quite open that he is a very big fan of Thomas Piketty, the French economist of capital of the 21st century. In other words, an update of Karl Marx's Das Kapital, which is capital of the 19th century. And the key recommendation from Piketty was not a capital gains tax, but a wealth tax, which is his whole book. That was his conclusion. That's what countries should have, is a wealth tax. There's obviously some debate about this, and I do think, though, that the debate should be based upon facts and real data, not a selective definition of income that is not going to be workable for tax purposes in any realistic world.
If I was to kind of put a different spin on what I think you might have just said there, and without me putting words in your mouth, it kind of feels like there's a spirit of Marxism that's flowing through here. Even though wealth tax has never really successfully worked anywhere in the world, there still seems to be this attempt to introduce it. Is that right?
David Parker can speak for himself, but I don't think he is at all reticent about saying that that's what he thinks we should have. I think that's what may have motivated him to seek more information of this sort. But I'm not saying that officials are on that. No, I mean, they're doing what their job is. They are doing what they're ordered to do by elected government. So that's all. All fine.
And the organization is obviously the sum of its parts, right? And there is this general vibe, though, it feels like anyway with the current government, that there has been this move towards trying to say that they're not doing it, but then they do it. And I'm talking specifically about capital gains tax or wealth tax. Seems like they keep on going down that path. And a lot of New Zealanders probably do understand and appreciate the need to fund the government and its activities, but they might not necessarily understand some of the economics behind it. And what we were talking about before with, say, for example, trying to tax unrealized capital gains. Well, if we are taxed like that and then our asset values go down, would it be true to say that the principal should flow in both directions? Like we would get tax refunds right now because our property values have gone down by 17%?
You should get tax refunds. Governments have a nasty neck of taxing the gain and not allowing for the losses, and particularly not allowing refunds. But I mean, these high wealth individuals in the IRD report, and the hard data there was that they pay $2.5 million on average each. A lot of variability, but that comes to about 750 million per annum. They're paying 311 people, quite a bit of money. Well, they wouldn't be paying that over the last couple of years. Almost impossible to believe that with asset prices decreasing, they'd have $750 million would not be available to be spent when it has been. So it creates this variability in government revenue. I would also add that the unrealised capital gains are not hard data that Inland Revenue has. They're quite clear that they just made guesstimates based upon average increases in asset prices, and they estimated how much. They don't have hard data at all on how much wealth people had, where they had it generally. What the returns were based upon their assumptions. And I don't think it's unfair to say that officials sitting in an office in Wellington are probably not the best people to be estimating rates of return on highly risky business assets.
That are volatile at the best of times.
They're highly volatile, and just applying little valuation models and ratios to try to figure out, life is more complicated than that. And if they were really good at it, they'd probably be out there in business making lots of money and be part of the 311 high wealth individuals. But so it's all guesstimate numbers, very, very wobbly numbers.
Okay. So I'm going to just read out a quote from a Stuff article by Susan Edmonds. I'll put the link in the show notes for those that want to read this. But it says that the Superior Report, which is the one that your firm commissioned, the Superior Report's key findings were that most of the tax collected from individuals in New Zealand came from, quote unquote, rich taxpayers. The richer they were, the more tax they were likely to pay. The 2.4% of people earning more than $180,000 a year paid just over a quarter of all the tax collected. Now, I'm in that group, fortunately, and I know that probably a lot of people that I work with, a lot of people that probably in that group as well, because of the circles that we move in. So 2.4% of people earning more than 180,000 paid a quarter of all tax, just 2.4% of people. So I guess my question around that is, do you feel like, in terms of what's coming through the media from these commission reports on the other side of the argument, do you feel like they're misrepresenting average, everyday, middle-class people as the rich?
The Treasury and Superior reports are all consistent on this stuff, and obviously the IRD report only looked at 311, so really didn't go into this at all. So, I mean, I don't think officials are trying to misrepresent anything. It's commentators on it, but you do see commentators. I saw one saying that the rich were only paying half the tax rate of the average person, and as a result, we have ram raiding in South Auckland. I mean, the causal connection beats me, but our tax system gets most of its money from those people earning $70,000 to $150,000 a year. That's the driving engine of Grant Robinson's money to fund the government. And the other figure is 1/3 of the people pay 2/3 of the tax. And that's all the people between $48,000 and $180,000, people below the 39%. And why is that? Because that's where the numbers are. Not only that you have to have an income to pay the tax, there has to be a lot of you. And there's a lot of people in that category. And no matter what you do with the tax system, that middle class group's got to fund the government. The lower income earners do not pay net tax. They get working for families and other cash benefits from the government. There are not many uber rich people, your 311, as I say, that's 750 million. You double that, you get 1.5 billion a year. That's in a government budget of 100 billion. That's not much, 1% on. So all the money every time has to come from middle class people. It's simply reality of life.
So do you think it's reasonable then to really try to go after these 311, or in reality, there's only 200 of them that are not coming forth wanting to donate to the government? But do you really think it's realistic to go after those people in particular? Is that kind of what this is about? Or like, I'm still trying to figure out why this report was actually commissioned. Like, what do you think they were trying to do by going after? Well, not, I shouldn't say going after, by researching these 311 people. What were they trying to do?
Well, I think it was a beat up. It intended to be a beat up, and that's certainly what they felt. It was a highly intrusive investigation. If anyone was involved, we had clients involved in it, into your assets, your expenditure patterns, your relationships. I think it was out to say that they weren't paying their fair share. I think they do pay their fair share. That's what the Superior Report concluded. Even if you went to sort of, you say that they pay, in the revenue report, come out with this headline number, wobbly numbers, wobbly methodology, all to show that they pay less than 10%. Let's double the tax they pay. So it goes from 750 million to 1.5 billion. It's extra $750 million to the government. What does that fund? Well, it provides for a tax cut of about $3 a week for the rest of New Zealanders. Less than a cup of coffee a week.
We have to subtract the cost of doing the report, though, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, if you doubled and put the tax, in order to do that under current law, put the tax rate from 39 to 78, you would end up with $3 for every New Zealander. I mean, it's not a solution to any fiscal issues. And of course, these people, if they're facing 78% tax rate, or instead of being paid their 2.5 million a year, they asked to pay 5 million a year. A lot of them will leave.
That's right.
They'll go to Australia, where they can live in Sydney and commute to New Zealand, and they'll take their 2.5 million with them. Thank you very much. And we've seen exactly that happen in Norway very recently. Norway had a reasonably comprehensive wealth tax, not totally, but probably one of the most comprehensive in the world. Mm-hmm. They increased that tax rate. A lot of people have migrated to Switzerland. That's actually caused a fiscal problem for the Norwegian government, because they tried to take some more money from the wealth tax and they lost a lot of their income tax revenue. Mm-hmm. So, Trevor McLean, who was a Minister of Revenue under Roger Douglas, used to, quoting French economists, saying that the art of taxing was to pluck the goose without too much hissing. Well, if you go too far, you actually kill the goose. Pluck too much out of it. These people are mobile, and if you beat them up, they will go. They take their investment, all their charitable giving, all their contributions with them.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a good idea, but
I don't think that's a good idea either. Unfortunately, I am seeing a few very wealthy people talking about doing exactly that. And so it's almost like you talk about plucking feathers. I'd say, hey, they're actually killing the golden goose who's laying the golden eggs. And how else are we going to actually create a society where there's enough revenue coming in to do that infrastructure stuff that we need to do, if we're going after the actual source of where that real wealth comes from? It makes no sense. And I look at this from the point of view of like a wealth builder, somebody who's starting out and they're trying to aspire to create financial security. And in the process, they're creating wealth that can be redistributed through the tax system as well in the process. But instead of emulating those at the top, we're almost being encouraged to envy those at the top instead. And I don't understand why most people aren't picking up on this, or maybe my perception is a bit screwy because I'm not seeing the full picture. But do you feel like most of New Zealanders are kind of seeing this accurately, or are they being swayed through these mainstream media reports?
I think they're very swayed by the headline number, that less than 10% number. They just, well, I'm paying, middle income earner, they are paying quite a bit of tax because they have to fund all the hospitals, schools, because 40% of the population not pay, in net terms any, and for good reason. They just don't have any income, enough income. But they've got to fund all of this stuff, and then they hear in the papers that these super rich people are paying half the rate they're paying. And I just think that's not a correct picture of how it is, because all that income that gets them down to that low rate is just paper profits, which come and go, as we all know. Anybody investments the last 2 years have seen money come in and then disappear again, and that's the nature of life. We live that. I mean, there are good things about the Inland Revenue Report, because one thing it did was very clear about is, of this 311 people, almost none of them inherited much. In other words, these are people who took off, and built businesses, took risks, did stuff. This is not a small group of people who inherited money and are passing it on to the next generation, and it's a little Jane Austen type society where very few people own all the wealth and all the power, and that's simply not true. And if that was the case, you would have some concerns. But these people all, to a very, very large extent, the amount of money they got from bequests or from their families inherited was minimal. Generally, come from state houses and things.
That's right. That's the common denominator. It creates a hunger, a desire to strive to achieve more, and they do so, and they can do so within a free market economy. And that's the fruit. That's what happens when you follow these core principles that actually work. And I get concerned because we're living in an environment now where it seems like that's kind of, there's just so much attack on that. I want to maybe just change tack a little bit, and we'll come back to this in a second, but I want to talk to you about charities, registered charitable trusts in New Zealand. And I know there's a case to be made for wanting to give more tax to the government so they can do good stuff with it. I have a massive question mark around the efficiency of government, and I am rather cynical that they would qualify to achieve that word of efficiency. Whereas I look at some charities and I can see in some cases like 85% or more of what they receive as income actually goes toward good stuff. They actually pass it through and they do good stuff with it. And as a result, the current tax rules are that if you're donating to a registered charitable trust, you get a third of that back, which I think is awesome. And it makes sense because we're choosing as people to give money towards things that are really efficient at doing the things that the government probably should do, but they're not. And therefore, we shouldn't have to pay tax twice to do that. Would you agree in principle with what I just said there, that if you are giving towards charities that are doing good things, that we should continue to receive a tax credit for that?
It's an on balance argument, yes. The on balance because there are some things which meet a charitable definition, which may not be obviously great for society. Wacko religions or something rather. It's not obvious to me why religions are charitable of any sort.
Just to pause you on that one, these wacko religions that I know of that give $20 million a year towards community support, I would say that that's a pretty obvious example of why we shouldn't be targeting them in particular.
Well, yes, but it's what they do. If they actually are providing the community support, the people who give the money often use their management skills to ensure, hands-on, they are actually getting good value for the money in a much more direct sense than a government bureaucrat will ever do.
Right.
And I think sort of in that sense, you should have a good, healthy, charitable sector. And I think it's appropriate that the government does not tax it. There are arguments against it in terms of, some of it is not maybe directed the way that overall society thinks is best, but you've got to take the good with the bad. I suppose with capitalism, you've got to take the good with the bad. I mean,
That's right.
Capitalism results in a lot of waste and two businesses running the same thing and all sorts of stuff. But it's better than the opposite of a centrally run economy.
Absolutely. So can I just ask a question around the report a little bit, because I'm kind of just, I would say, an amateur in terms of trying to understand how these reports get commissioned and then how PR firms work to disseminate the information to media outlets who then put their own bias on it and then distribute it to the plebs who form their own opinions, good or bad. And there's all sorts of weird things that kind of get conjured up in the process. But you commissioned Sapiri to generate this report. Can you tell me why you did that?
Well, the government announced this inquiry and to look at the average effective tax rates of high wealth individuals. And we talked to officials about their methodology and what they're doing. Didn't like what we heard at all. It didn't conform to there's a whole literature about how to measure in economics effective tax rates. This didn't take up any of that at all. Even the stuff that Treasury and the Revenue have done on effective tax rates for investment and so forth uses totally different methodologies. It looked like it was going to produce a false picture of our tax system, which has proved to be true. And how do we deal with that? Well, we decided to actually do a report which was based upon orthodox economic techniques developed over many, many years, which is the Sapiri report, which follows the standard OECD type and academic literature. How do you do effective tax rates? And we just saw a distorted picture coming out. And I've got a bit of a passion for the tax system, as I've said before. I think it's a good system. I could see this as painting it as a broken system. And I think that would be a very, very bad picture to paint. So we decided to commission Sapiri to do the report, and they did.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned that you're passionate about the tax system as it is, and when something is blatantly not true or it's misleading, it's probably more accurate here. It's implying something that's not quite right by withholding some key aspects around the definitions of what economic income really is. But what I'm guessing it would cost a bit of money to commission a report. Is that something that you received funding for with some of your clients or some other mysterious donors, or is this something that you guys just paid for out of the goodness of your heart?
We paid for it.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we're in business. We make money. We obviously ultimately get that money from fees.
Yeah.
But I didn't take out my private bank balance to pay for it. But
I know what you mean.
It come from fees eventually. But we paid for it. I mean, and we absolutely told Sapiri we have no requirement what result they come up with. Just here's we talked about the standard economics methodology. Can you do something based upon that rather than this very dubious stuff that we saw officials doing?
Yes.
And come out with whatever result. If it came out with a very, very low tax rates and high wealth individuals, fine, that's what it is. So,
yes.
And they are very, it's a very reputable firm, and we're very pleased with the results they came up with.
Well, facts come before truth, so makes sense. Got to get those facts. So, with the Treasury and the IRD reports, then, pretty easy question: who paid for that?
Taxpayer.
We paid for it, didn't we?
The middle class, if you like. As we've talked about. I mean, I don't know what it's public that the revenue one costs $3 million.
Yeah,
I can assure you, Sapiri did not charge us $3 million.
Yes, I was going to say.
That would come out of my bank balance. We wouldn't have done that.
So as we come in for a landing, again, going back to what we started with, you believe that the New Zealand tax system is fair, it's fine, doesn't need an overhaul. What about the government? And obviously, we have to be careful criticizing the government so we don't go to prison. But what do you think about the New Zealand government? Is it efficient? And as a taxpayer, is it acting in good faith here?
Well, I mean, is the government efficient? there's certain things only governments can do, and you don't want massive poverty. You want people to have opportunities, live in a state house, become one of the 311. Personally, happy to do that, but I think governments are inherently inefficient at delivering stuff, education, healthcare. They have to be there for that, but we do need a private sector healthcare system to demonstrate how you can do things better, same with education and so forth. But I'm a great believer in a really good public healthcare system and education system. And I think it just goes beyond a decent society. It's one of the attractions that if you're talking to people thinking of migrating to New Zealand, high wealth people even, one thing they place a lot of attention on is the education system for their kids and a good health system. And having that is part of your competitive advantage compared to living in a third world country.
So if that was the outcome, having a good education system, a good public health system, if that was one of the key metrics, like you're a tax advisor, right? So you're going to be, you would be able to look at any business probably and just see if it was running efficiently because its output was greater than its input. Whereas when you look at the government and you apply a similar sort of lens, obviously the metrics are really different to, there's a lot of subjective sort of valuations that you would put on health outcomes and education outcomes. But again, do you think that commissioning reports like this to basically beat up on rich people, spending our money to do it, do you think that's right?
Well, I think this was a misguided project, and I have a lot of sympathy for officials who are caught up with it, frankly.
So in other words, no, you don't think it's right.
I just don't think this was getting the facts out there, getting them right. But the Treasury one is normal stuff that you'd expect the Treasury to be doing. I don't agree with the methodology, but they themselves have lots of caveats about that. This produce noise and misinformation, not facts and good information.
Interesting. What would you say then to those that agree with either one of those other reports and agree with going after the rich to get more tax out of them? What would you say to them in terms of, hey, where should you actually look to do a little bit more research before you comment on this? What could they consider, or where could they go to kind of learn a little bit more about how tax actually works in practice?
Well, the best place, I think, is the McLeod report 2002. I still think that's the best report on the tax system we've had, and it went through a lot of these issues, pointed out that you cannot use our tax system to redistribute income because there's not enough. The key role of the tax system is to raise the revenue for government, not to social engineer. And you can destroy those people and force them out of the country, the top people, but you can't use, there's not enough money there to actually provide anything for the bottom. A lot of those aspects were dealt with in that report. Shove taxes on people saving, they stop saving. You tax their work and they stop working. You tax business investors and they stop investing. You've got to think about these things when you look at tax policy and look at these things sensibly. They should not be dogmatic. I mean, capital gains tax on a realised basis is something other countries have. We could have one too. The world's not going to fall apart, but it won't raise much money. The Cullen review, which I was on, set out a capital gains tax and a very comprehensive, pretty unfriendly one. And that was only going to raise 4% of revenue, and half of that came from residential properties, from rentals. Since then, we've denied interest deductions, lost ring fencing, extended the bright line test, so you do pay tax on capital gains for 10 years. So there's almost no revenue, I would think, anymore from that source. So a capital gains tax then would raise something like 2% of revenue, a couple of $1 billion, after 10 years.
Right.
There's no room for these things to offer the massive tax cuts to the middle class. And that's the whole heart of some of this stuff, is the middle class is feels that it's being overtaxed,
Yes. Yeah.
and people come along and, oh well, we'll tax these other people and give you relief. Well, it won't. That's a
Mm.
fact. It just won't.
Mm.
What the middle class, the only solution to the middle class, it is lots of these people up $100,000 a year who are actually struggling at the moment with
Oh yeah,
mortgages, the
definitely.
cost of living, and the only solution is government expenditure.
Mm-hmm.
Reduce the tax burden. There are
Yeah.
no, you don't run off and try to persecute 311 people who are actually contributing a lot to society. The answer is an efficient government spending targeted to what its objectives are, and not spending to subsidize Tesla cars for some unknown reason.
So that's too close to home for me, Robin. But yeah, no, I know what you're saying. So in other words, David Parker should put away his book on or his put away Das Kapital and check out 2002 McLeod report, which I'll put a link into that into the show notes for anybody else who wants to kind of get stuck into something that's solid. And I think like the discussion that we've had today, obviously, I think it's pretty obvious what my views are around these things. And I think anybody who's trying to build wealth, you're probably really resonating with a lot of New Zealanders who probably feel quite scared, to be honest, to speak up, especially in social media, where those who do potentially have a lot more time because they're not creating income that they pay tax on just quietly, they are probably too afraid to speak out. And but I think it's really important that we are free to have these conversations without repercussions as well. So thank you for your work. Thank you for commissioning that Superior report. I think like without people doing that, man, like we'd just be completely misled because most of us take our guide from the media, right?
Yeah, I mean, try to distinguish between facts and opinion. And opinions are great, but they should be based on facts and get the facts right first. That's my view.
That's awesome. Really appreciate your time, Robin. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope to catch up with you again in the future.
Thank you. Thanks for
Cheers.
having me on.
Awesome.